This is a tough one. I saw Jean Vanier speak at two different conferences. The first was in Antigonish, Nova Scotia in the mid-1980s. And the second was on a farm, sort of a retreat north of Toronto in the early 1990s. It was there I met with him briefly and told him how much I appreciated his books and his witness. I'd read a couple of his books early on. If you're Catholic and you're Canadian, Jean Vanier is definitely a household name to you. Despite holding heterodox opinions about church teaching, to say the least, almost a dozen Catholic schools across the country are named for him. And he won dozens of accolades and honorary degrees, all manner of worldly admiration. We all know the story. Under the inspiration of a Dominican priest named Father Thomas Philippe, Jean Vanier, as the founding myth goes, visited two mentally handicapped men outside Paris and decided to have them come live with him. And that was the beginning of l'Arche, French for the Ark, now a worldwide federation of group homes for the mentally handicapped. I have to say, when he walked into a room or strode casually up to a lectern before a large crowd, his beautiful face always seemed to be beaming. Indeed, his tall frame radiated a kind of palpably peaceful aura. It can't be denied. What also can't be denied is that Jean Vanier was also a serial sexual predator of women. After all the heartache and anger and disillusionment felt by millions of Catholics, from the long Lent of 2002 to the summer of shame of 2018, now Jean Vanier? You kidding me? The truth is, he seems to have learned his diabolical strategies for taking full advantage of women from none other than Father Thomas Philippe, his mentor and spiritual father, who was a despicable and manipulative fraud, as it turns out. These two men traded notes. They lied for each other. They covered for each other. They also shared in a deeply disturbing, if hidden, narcissism, which is doubly ironic considering how many books Jean Vanier cranked out about being humble and little and small and anguished and weak and broken. Those are his constant themes in most of his books. Considering that he never really talked about virtue, about growing in holiness in practical terms, perhaps all of his books are actually autobiographies. Learning his lessons well from Père Thomas, Jean Vanier leveraged this living saint reputation to his advantage to manipulate and sexually abuse 6 adult women that we know of. So far, these shocking revelations bring with them a host of additional questions. First, the Holy Office punished Thomas Philippe in 1956 with severe restrictions and sanctions, which means that his despicable behavior was known by the Vatican. Why was this not flagged decades earlier when l'Arche was getting off the ground in 1964? We know of 14 women who say they were abused by Philippe long after his formal punishment for doing the same thing in the early 50s. How many more lives were badly damaged because Jean Vanier gave him cover and access to a steady flow of vulnerable women? How was Jean Vanier able to defend and cover for this pervert predator for over 50 years until irrefutable facts were presented in 2014? And even then, his response was late and kind of lame. Even after the truth came out, one of his last books, published the next year, 2015, is titled Life's Great Questions. And not only does the book have no great answers to anything, he actually included references to Thomas Philippe, calling him his friend, and as the inspiration for l'Arche throughout the whole book. Why was that allowed to happen? Pope Francis publicly mentioned that he'd talked to Vanier the week before he died in May 2019 and went out of his way to praise his life work. They had met the same year he died. As of this moment, the Pope has not said a word, neither about his victims nor about the scandal itself at all. Why not? Finally, how can a man who lived a very public life as a model of morality and goodness have so successfully segmented and hid this level of evil for so long? If he wanted to act out sexually with a woman, he could have gotten married. But he freely chose the single life, which we all thought was a heroic example of celibacy lived out for the sake of the kingdom, not as a cover to get women in need in bed under the guise of spiritual direction that included bizarre and demonic language about Jesus and Mary that the rest of the world would not understand. I have a link below if you have the stomach for it. It's very bizarre. In retrospect, there were certain signs, pretty easy to miss, I guess, like seemingly disparate dots waiting for someone to come along and connect them. The first is that none of his books were ever published by Orthodox Catholic publishers like Ignatius Press or Sophia Institute Press or Emmaus Road or TAN or Ascension Press. Not a one. No, it was always the left-tilting houses like Paulist Productions, 23rd Publishers, Franciscan Media, and the like. The sort of publisher is very popular with the National Catholic Reporter crowd. In fact, since this scandal news broke, I'm really amazed at how few of my Catholic friends in the United States have ever heard of him. That's partly because he deliberately partnered with and had documentaries about himself produced by and books written by either sentimental writers with very little interest in doctrine, like the liberal tilting Father Ron Rolheiser, or Mennonite pacifists like Stanley Hauerwas, to name a couple. And for good reason. Jean Vanier had no love for Catholic teaching, at least not in the matter of sexual ethics. In some ways, he seemed to be embarrassed by Catholicism, as many of his offhand references to the Church are kind of pejorative in one way or another. In fact, he wrote like a liberal Protestant. Again, copious references to Jesus, almost no connections to the Church or to the particulars of Church teaching, except to gently criticize the Church for being too narrow or too slow or too rigid or what have you. It came out 2 years before he died that he was an ardent supporter of euthanasia, which does not track with his carefully crafted public image of caring for the poor, the suffering, and the vulnerable. In the feminist revised version of an early book called Male and Female, He Made Them, which was absurdly changed to Male and Female, God Made Them, Jean Vanier had additionally morphed into a dissenter on the question of homosexual behavior. Here's another thing. Given the fact that people with Down syndrome are targeted for abortion in over 90% of the cases, he was situated to be a magnificent spokesman for the pro-life cause. But Jean Vanier couldn't quite bring himself to do that. As far as the official reputation went, Vanier was to the mentally handicapped what Mother Teresa of Calcutta was to the poorest of the poor. There's one major difference. Mother Teresa fought against abortion her whole life, in word and deed, whenever she got the chance. When the Order of Canada awarded its medal to the greatest mass murderer in Canadian history, the abortionist Henry Morgentaler, Vanier refused to hand his medal back. Contrast this with Madonna House, whose leaders gave back the medal awarded to their very pro-life foundress, servant of God Catherine de Hewitt-Doherty, who was awarded the Order of Canada in 1976. Speaking of Catherine Doherty, I found something really fascinating. She knew Jean Vanier, and she corresponded with him a couple of times. She wrote a letter to him in 1974, which is 4 years after the earliest known case of sexual abuse by Vanier. He had visited the community in Combermere, Ontario in February of that same year. She said these words to him in a letter. I love your mother and I have loved your father, but toward you I have a very special love in the heart of Christ. And so my daily prayers are with you. Catherine goes on. And I have worried about you. Truly how stupid and idiotic it is to worry about you, who, in a manner of speaking, is the very darling of the world, and a very beautiful spiritual darling of many, many people. I mean it in this sense. How idiotic to worry about a person like you who leads thousands to God. But here I am, worrying. Although I must admit, it isn't an ordinary worry like worrying about money or jobs or so on. Please pray for me because I think I should not write this letter. Yet here I am, writing it. I worry about your fragmentation. Another stupid word that doesn't apply to you at all, my very dear. How can one worry about the fragmentation of a saint, at least one who is on the way to sanctity like you? But here I am, praying for you constantly. Something intangible, something that I can't catch, something that bothers me and that I must write to you about, even though I feel a fool for doing so. I wish that in some sort of way you spared yourself. Not for yourself, you would never do that, but for God. I wish you took a rest. But who am I to tell you that? Unquote. It seems to me that this prophetic woman who's a candidate for beatification knew that something was off about Jean Vanier, something not good. In addition to praying for his victims and for his soul, I think we should pray for the community he started and the vision that accompanied it. Kudos, I have to say, to Tina Boverman of L'Arche USA and the leadership team of L'Arche International, who have been very direct and courageous in the way they've handled this. The prophetic witness of L'Arche is even more urgently needed today than it was in 1964. Subscribe to this channel, hit the like button. If you like what you hear and you want to know more about Coffin Nation, click that link below as well, coffinnation.com, the largest online community of Catholic culture builders now in 25 countries. coffinnation.com might be for you. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?